Hello everybody, great to see you back here on the channel. Now at this time of year, most people are out there shooting the constellation Orion. Fantastic view all throughout the night sky. And here I am no different to you. So in this video, I want to show you my editing process for shooting Orion with the Nikon Z6 camera, 35mm f1.8 Nikon Z lens. Now what I did, I shot the constellation of Orion with a single exposure using this combination with my hydrogen alpha modified camera. I shot the foreground at a different time using a non-modified camera, but all at 35mm focal lengths. And so I want to run you through the editing. Now, editing Orion I find more difficult than perhaps editing the Milky Way galactic core. It just seems to be harder to really bring out the detail without really blowing out other parts of the image. So I'm going to attempt in this video to simplify the whole process. So let's get into it. Now there are two parts to this video. Essentially I'm editing the foreground, which you can see here of this car and Orion in the background, and then I'm going to be editing one single image of a tracked sky here, both shot at 35mm. Now the first thing you're going to notice straight up front is that these don't quite align because they're shot on different occasions. Even though it's exactly the same composition, it's a little bit off skew, so I'm going to have to fix it up later on. But let's go back to the foreground here and have a look at what we've got. Now you'll notice here, this is a single exposure at 35mm, f2.8, 10 seconds at ISO 2000. And I'm focused on the car. So the car's in focus, and if you look at the stars, they're actually out of focus. And that's normal at 35mm because I'm fairly close to the subject. But in this occasion, it doesn't matter because I'm going to be doing a replacement of the sky anyway, so they don't have to be sharp and clear at this particular moment in time. Now, I've taken two images of the car, one predominantly lit from this right-hand side, the other one predominantly lit from the left-hand side at the front, as you can see here. And I'm just going to blend those two in with the sky once I get the sky sorted. So as far as editing on these images, there's not very much done. You can see there I've added some clarity and I've done some basic noise reduction here and profile corrections, and that is it. That's pretty much straight out of the camera, the way that I've shot it, lit with a torch, and pretty much the same as I always do my light painted foregrounds. Now let's move on here to the sky. So this is where most of the effort is going to be, and this is a hydrogen alpha modified camera. This is shot at f2.8, 120 seconds at ISO 800, one single tracked exposure, and you can see what it looks like. That sort of general sort of magenta cast caused by the astro modified camera. What I might do there is just change that a little bit here before we go anywhere. I'm just going to make a few little adjustments to just get away a fraction from that magenta cast. Just a little bit, doesn't have to be much. One of the things that I look at sometimes when I'm doing this is this color histogram here. So you can see if I move this temp slider across, how it changes the color balance there quite considerably either way. And so what I tend to do is just try and balance that up a little bit and get it roughly somewhere there. And I might just increase the exposure a little bit on this. As far as color balance, I'm going to be doing more color balancing later in the process. The other thing I will do though, I'll enable the profile corrections. It's not going to do much. I will add a little bit of noise reduction here. Now, a lot of people don't put noise reduction into these images, but I think for me, it's not going to hurt. It's not going to soften the image too much at this point in time. I think what I'll do now is head over to Photoshop because most of the heavy lifting for this image is going to be done in Photoshop. So let's right click on that image, edit in Photoshop, and we shall go from there. Now here we find ourselves in Photoshop. You can see I've got my layer here. First thing I'm going to do is duplicate that layer. So I go to Layer, Duplicate Layer, and I'm going to call this Starless, and you'll see why in a minute. I'm going to duplicate that layer one more time and call that layer Stars. I'm going to be separating the stars from the nebulosity and edit the nebulosity as a separate entity, which is something I'll always do. So the first thing there is to click on that starless layer, go up to Filter, and I'm going to be using the RC Astro Star Exterminator. and I'm going to click OK on that. Now this takes a little while to do its job, but what it's essentially doing is analyzing this image, and it is going to remove the stars and just leave the nebulosity. So we'll come back to this when it is finished. Now this is the end result. The stars have been removed from this plate here. You can see the stars are still available on that top layer, which I'm going to work on in a minute. In fact, I'll work on those right now. So I'm going to click on that layer there, go up to Image, go down to Apply Image, and then click where it says Layer here. I'm going to click and select Starless, which is actually that layer there, over here. And go down here to the blending mode and click on Subtract, and OK. So now on that top layer we have just stars. The layer underneath that we have just the background, which includes all the nebulosity, etc. in the frame. And underneath that is my original layer we started with. So I'm just going to keep that sitting there. Now the first thing I'm going to do here is duplicate this starless layer. Click on Layer, Duplicate, and the reason I do that is so that I've still got an original starless layer in case I make some mistakes, and I'll go back to that. So clicking on that. Now there's a couple of things I want to do to this. I want to push it a little bit further, but not too far, and we'll probably change the color balance a little bit here as well. So first things first, I'm just going to go into the curves adjustment layer, and I'm just going to click about here on this little arrow and move that up a little bit, just like that. So that's increasing the exposure a bit. Now you can do this a number of times. So you can see if I undo that, you can see all I've really done is just increase the exposure. So I will do that one more time, I think. Click on down here, curves, adjustment layer. Let's just push that up a little bit further. Just a bit more. Now I've got to be a bit careful doing this because every time I do that, I'm going to start blowing out highlights. And you can see this nebula here. If I zoom in, you can see what that looks like. It's really easy to blow that out. Where are we? There it is there. So what I will do here is actually go back to my layer mask, which I've got sitting here. Let's have a look. So both of those have layer masks. They're those curves adjustments. So I click on that and go over here to the brush tool. Make it black, brush tool, and zoom in a fraction on that so I can see it better. Make my brush really small to cover that. Make sure it's on soft brush and 100% opacity up the front here, and click on top of that. And see how I've just taken that exposure out. And I'll do the same thing here on that one. Make that brush a bit smaller. And so there we go. Now I think what I'll do now is merge those layers. Now the way I do this is I turn all the layers off I don't want to work on here. Click on there and layer, merge visible. I'll click on that. And that's essentially just merged all the visible layers. So if I turn them off, it doesn't merge them. And there's a lot of things you can do, but that's what I'm going to do with this particular image. Okay, so the next thing I want to do here is just have a quick look at the color balance. So I'm going to go back to another curves adjustment layer. And this time I'm going to go into this RGB and adjust the blue channel. Click about here in the middle of it somewhere and just push that up a little bit. So I'm actually essentially adding more blue to this image. Then I'm going to go to the green channel, which is here. Click about the same spot and punch that up a fraction. And you can see what I've actually done there is taken red out of the image by default because you've got the red, green and blue. Now if I look at that red channel, let's just go there, red, you can see if I adjust, it makes all sorts of funny color changes here. But if I want to add a little bit more red into, and I want that pink of the nebulosity to stand out a bit more, then I'll just click there and increase that slightly. You can see what happens, it brings the red back. Now, let's just leave it there for a minute. So if I undo that adjustment, you can see I went from that image to this image. That to that. So it's much more blue. So we'll just leave it there for the moment. And what I'm going to do is merge visible again. So I'll click on that. Now what I want to do is duplicate this layer. So layer, duplicate layer. And this one I'm going to run through Adobe Camera Raw. So I'll call it Camera Raw just so I can remember, but it doesn't really matter whether you name it or not. So let's go up to Filter, Camera Raw filter. First thing I want to do is adjust dehaze. I'm going to put some dehaze into this image, and that will sort of punch it out a fair bit. I'm also going to increase the exposure of the whole image. Then I want to go into the color here and just increase the temperature. So let's have a look at that. I'm going to put some yellow into this. Now I'd suggest being conservative with this. And now let's have a bit of a look at this image. I think there's a fair bit of noise in this image, as you can see, the graininess. Now there's a couple of ways I can approach this. One, I can go into Detail tab here and apply a fairly heavy noise reduction, but that does take away detail out of my image. Another way to do that is to apply some specific noise reduction using topaz denoise. And I think I might do that. So I'm just going to leave that image there for the moment. So I'm going to click OK, and that will save that as it is. Now, some of you may or may not have topaz denoise. It's a plugin, as was Star Exterminator, but these tools are fantastic for doing the finer details, and particularly getting those extra little bits when you're pushing these images the way that we are here. So anyway, I'm going to apply topaz to this particular image. So I'll go up to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Denoise. And now we'll just have a look at this and see what happens. It comes up with some adjustments, various degrees that you can apply this filter. Now the thing that you're going to notice here is the difference here between the image on the left and the right. It's giving us a preview of what severe noise reduction using topaz looks like. And that's pretty good. Yes, when you apply noise reduction, you do lose a bit of detail, but I'm happy for that to be a trade-off because I want a nice clean image. So I'm happy with that. I'm just going to go with the default settings and press apply. And then we just wait. You can see the progress bar at the top here. We'll wait for that to apply itself. Okay, so you can see here we have finished. And if we zoom in on this shot, it's now very clean. Have a look at that. It's made a big difference. Now remember, there's no stars in this image at this point. So we're going to bring those in a minute, but I still want to work on this a little bit. Now, one of the traps that we have, and I'm the same as everybody else, is we tend to try and push these images too far, and they become somewhat unrealistic in how they should look in the real world. And I'm not wanting to do that. I love the detail, I love the little bits here, the Witch Head Nebula, etc. But I don't want to push this too far. But one thing I will do at this point is duplicate that layer. So let's go to duplicate layer, because what I want to do here is to have, I'll call this one noise copy. The reason I'm doing this is so that I can always go back and I've still got a copy of that particular version of this rather than having to go through all these adjustments again. So I'll just hide that one for a minute. Click on that noise copy, and I want to go back down here to the curves adjustment layer, and I want to do just another little curve in here, and we'll just see how this might look. So it's just a standard S curve in this particular case. So what we're doing there is getting more of this detail. Now again, I'm hesitant to push this too far, because that's what happens when you keep adjusting these parameters. You will keep going too far and end up with something that looks very unrealistic. So we went from that one to that one. I don't mind that. It's a bit darker and it looks pretty good. Now, one thing I am going to do though, when you do that, it just starts blowing out the highlights again. So I'm going to zoom in on that nebula there. You can see that center of that core of that nebula is blowing out. So I want to undo that a little bit, but just on that portion. So what I'm going to do there is grab my brush, just simply click on that area, and see how that's brought a bit more detail back into that. It's always going to be somewhat blown out, because typically when you capture the Orion nebula, you'll blow out that core because it's quite bright in respect to the rest of the image. Okay, so here we go. Now what I want to do there is merge that layer. So let's go down to merge visible. Now remember, before I do that, it's only these two layers which are visible. So merge visible. I want to bring the stars back in, and let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at the star layer. Now at the moment, the star layer is just the stars on a black background. But one thing I do want to have a look at here is there seems to be a reasonable amount of chromatic aberration around these stars. Let's just check. See, there's a blue haze around that. I don't like that. So what I'm going to do is take these stars over to Camera Raw. So I'll click on the stars layer, go up to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and click on that. So in this particular section, I'm going to go to Optics and click on Optics. Now I'm going to zoom in on that star there, or thereabouts, and grab this little eyedropper and drag it across, and it will select that blue color. And see how it's taken that blue fringe away from all of those stars? That's exactly what I want it to happen. Now I don't want to do anything else, so I'm just going to click OK, and that now takes us back to where we were before with that adjustment applied. Now, to get the stars to show here, I've got to change the blend mode. So let's click on that star layer, click on this little arrow, and go down to Color Dodge. We can use Screen, we can use Lighten, we can use Linear Dodge Add, and Lighten. You can click any of these, lighter color. So the thing about this is, when you apply this blend mode, it does actually the same thing as star minimization. So you can see that with the normal blend mode, we've got plenty of stars there. Okay, once we apply one of these presets, then suddenly our stars are diminished somewhat, which is exactly what we want to do when we have star minimization. So anyway, here we have our star layer and our edited layer. Now I could look at what it looks like without some of those other adjustments, as you can see there. I can go right back down to here. So you can see it looks quite different with the various edits that I've done along the way, and that's why I've kept those, because I want them to stay, so just in case I need to go back to them. But look, I'm pretty happy with that, because like I said at the beginning, I don't want to push this too hard. I could push it a lot harder, and a lot of people would say, oh, you can go a lot further with that. But you know, that's just me. But one thing I will do here is I'm going to add a layer mask to the star layer, just by clicking that little box down the bottom here. And I'm actually going to thin out those stars even further by grabbing my brush tool, a fairly large brush, about that big, and rub out the majority of stars down here on the bottom. Now you're probably saying, well, why am I doing that? And the reason I'm doing that is because what I want to do is smooth this into the horizon of my foreground. Now you'll notice often in real life, there aren't so many stars on the horizon of our images because it gets blurrier and a bit hazier down there. And by removing these stars off this layer here, it helps to give that more realistic look. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is actually flatten the image. So let's go to Layer, Flatten Image, discard Hidden Layers, which is all those other spare ones I had, and press Yes. Okay, so there we have our image. Now you can see some of the stars have reappeared, but that looks pretty good. Less stars down at the bottom, which is where I took them out a minute ago. And there we have our flattened layer. All right, so what I'm going to do now is simply cross out of Photoshop up here. It asks me if I want to save it. I will say yes. And that will now take me back to Lightroom. I'll just finish it off there and then we'll move on to the foreground images. So we're now back in Lightroom and you can see the image there. Now compare that to the original image, which is here. And you can see there's a fair bit of difference from the original image. Now the original image here is totally stars everywhere. And this image, which we just edited, is far more sparse and it brings out that nebulosity in the sky. I'd probably push it a little bit further here. I like the adjustments here in Lightroom. I'm going to actually add a bit more dehaze. Just a little bit. When you add dehaze to an image, it actually does tend to add a bit more blue into the image. And I don't mind that in this particular case. The other thing it does, it tends to darken images somewhat. So I'll just click on the exposure slider here and just lift it up a tiny little bit. Maybe just add a little bit more yellow into the scene. It's too much at +5. So I'm going to go down to about +3. Because I don't want it too cool, I don't want it too warm. I want it somewhere in the middle. Now, there's a fair bit of green in this image, but I'm hesitant to push the magenta slider over. If I do that, it's going to bring back that color I had before, which I didn't like. But there's a lot of magenta in this image. It's a hydrogen alpha modified camera, so it brings out all this pink nebulosity, which is there anyway. I like it. It's got mood and it's got flavor and character, and that's the thing that I love about images like this. So what I'll do now is I will export this image, file, export, and that's going to bring up the export dialog box. I'm going to send that to the folder where it should be, Orion Sky 35 millimeters. I'm going to export this as a TIFF file. So I'll select it there, and there we go. All the rest of the settings there are standard, and press export. Okay, so that's our sky done. Now I'm going to move on to the foreground images. Okay, so here's our two foreground images. Now, before any of you comment down below, I want to address something here. Now, some of you are going to be looking at this and saying, well, that sky looks completely different to the one that you just created. It's darker, and it doesn't quite look the same. Well, that's true. And you know why? Because the other image was a much longer exposure. So it gathers a whole lot more detail in that sky. Now, this is only a 10-second shutter speed at ISO 2000. So it's not going to gather anywhere near as much as that other image did at 2-minute shutter speed. So, you know, once we do the final edit, you will see that this thing is very dynamic. And my aim is to make this car really stand out, but the background also to stand out. So it's got that 2 points of interest, which I think is really important. So I'm going to select both of those images, right click, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. Okay, so here are our two images in Photoshop. Now I'm going to do this a little bit differently to my normal method, and you'll understand why in a moment. So what I'm going to do is disable the bottom layer, click on the top layer, and I'm going to add a layer mask. And my intention here is to rub those stars out. So let's get a brush, and I'm going to grab a hard brush, quite a large one, and simply just rub out. Nope, that's at 12%. I've got to make sure that's at 100%. I'm rubbing the stars out. Now it doesn't matter, I don't have to be perfect around these trees, and I'll explain why in just one moment. Just keep in mind I'm using a hard brush. Now I'm actually going over the trees to a large degree. My intent here is to get rid of all the stars. The trees aren't a problem, the stars potentially are a problem. So remember, I'm using a hard brush. This is not fancy. So now what I'll do, I will enable the bottom layer. Wow, didn't have to do too much there, did I? But what I will do, just to make sure it blends properly, I'm going to click on that top layer and change the blend mode to lighten. Now when I do that, you can see how the image changes dramatically. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm just making a few adjustments to the layers. So I've added a layer mask here. You can see how I'm just blending in the foreground a little bit because there was a little bit of wind present, and you can see that that's overlaying pretty well. I don't mind that. So now we've got the two layers, and if I just reveal a bit more of the front of the car there, you can see, yeah, that looks better. That looks better. I'm going to stamp these layers, so I'm going to press Control, Shift, Alt, and E together, and you can see how that's created a layer combined of those two images. Now I can turn those two layers off and I've still got the same effect. The reason I did that was because I didn't want to destroy individuality of the two layers. I want to maintain that, but I want to have one layer to work with because I'm going to do a sky replacement. So one of the things that I know I have to be wary of with this image is that the contrast in the sky is not very great between the sky and the background, particularly these trees, and so the sky replacement is not going to do a great job at this. So what I'm going to do is click on that layer, which is the two layers merged together, go up to duplicate that again, and then I'm going to add a brightness and contrast here, adjustment layer. So I'm going to click up and increase the brightness of this image considerably. What I'm looking for is a bigger contrast between the trees and the sky. Okay, now you can see it's blowing out the car, but at this stage, I'm not overly concerned about the car. It's more I'm worried about these trees. But what I can do is just click on that adjustment layer and grab a black brush, and I can rub that out on the car itself. I'm not too concerned about the car because I've still got the car on the layer underneath. But I'm just doing this to show you why I'm doing what I'm doing here. The question always has to be, why do we do this? I'm actually trying to get the sky replacement to replace the sky correctly over the top of the old sky, and that old sky was a little bit too dark. And that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't normally shoot this subject with the methods and the settings I showed you. I would do it a little bit differently, but I shot this foreground a little while ago and I wasn't intending to do a sky replacement on it originally. So now I'm going to click on that one and go up to layer, merge visible, and that is now a layer. You can see the one underneath it, which is darker, considerably darker, and we're going to come back to that one a bit later on. But at this stage, this is the layer I'm going to be applying a sky replacement to. So let's just now go up to Edit, Sky Replacement, and that will now find, this is the image that we created earlier, and Photoshop will now work on replacing the sky. Okay, and you can see it's done a pretty good job. That looks pretty good indeed. Now, there are some adjustments you can make here within these settings, which can all be adjusted later as well, but I'll just show you a few of those. So, for example, you can change the scale and the temperature, brightness, etc. You can shift the edge. Now, this image I don't think needs too much of that because of the adjustment I did before, but one thing you can do, you can zoom in on the image here by clicking that little magnifying glass. I can now zoom in on the screen. I can get a bit closer. I want to have a look at the top of the car here. And it's a little bit soft there because this algorithm works basically to blend the foregrounds, and to do it smoothly, especially with these trees, and they're blowing around a fair bit in the wind. I'm going to just go over this a little bit with my brush tool and fix it up. So I'll go to this little adjustment here. It selects an overlay blend mode at 50%, which is about right. I can make it smaller by adjusting the bracket keys. So you can see I've gone over the roof of the car, blended that in better than what it was before, and I think that looks pretty good. Now I can move around the image just to see whether I'm happy with the blend, but at this stage it's not looking too bad. Trees are always difficult, as you can imagine, but that has done a really, really good job, I think, of blending those trees. I can rub along the foreground here where the horizon hits. As you can see, I can brush that down a little bit more to make it look better, but overall, I'm pretty happy with that. All right, so once we're happy with those little fine adjustments, we can then click OK, and we can actually exit this dialog. And now what you see is all of these layers that have been created. Now remember, I changed that foreground layer, so I've still got the other one underneath. So if I actually enable that and disable the other one, you can see the difference there. Now I think what I will do there is leave the top half of that image the same, but I want to just blend in the foreground at the bottom a little bit better. So to do that, I'm just going to put a layer mask onto this layer and just rub it in. Not much change, it's only subtle. The sky was what I was more concerned about. The foreground was okay. So as you can see, I've still got all of the layers here that I created originally, but I'm not using them now at the bottom. I just kept them there just in case I had to go back or if I made a mistake for some reason. Now, with this sky replacement panel, there's all sorts of layers and layer masking that it creates. So you can go in here and do a bit of fine tuning around these trees if you want to. I don't think I need to. That's what the trees look like. They were blowing around in the wind. That's why they're blurry on the edges. But other than that, the sky replacement has done a great job. One thing I will do though is disable the edge lighting group. You can see that listed here. So I'm just going to click that off and you can see the difference that makes. See how it's brightened up the horizon a little bit? And I think it helps with the blending. Okay, so at this point, I think we can flatten our image and move on. So let's do that. Let's go up to Layer, Flatten Image, Discard Hidden Layers. There's quite a few of them. I'll say yes. And there we have our final image. Let's go back to Lightroom. So here we are back in Lightroom. All I've done here is just a touch more dehaze and plus a little bit more warm temp because I adjusted the dehaze. But overall, if we look at this image full screen, there it is. and I think it looks pretty magnificent. Now, one of the things I must stress is that this image is, and here we are back in Lightroom, and I'll show you this image full screen just to give you an idea of what it looks like. I like it. I think it looks fantastic. The blend is pretty good. If I was shooting this again now, I'd do it a little bit differently, but I'm pretty happy with the result as it is anyway. Now, I just want to say to you again, the foreground was shot at a different time and location to the background star shot. Now, you'll notice the background star shot doesn't have any foreground elements in it. So I've moved away from the trees and I've shot it with a clear horizon. That's vital for the blending process. Also, if I was shooting this now, I would light this differently and I would have more contrast in the sky. In other words, I would brighten up that background exposure to do the sky replacement. But apart from that, there's not much else I would do differently. Now, again, I want to stress that because this was shot at a different time and location, Orion itself may be in slightly different position. You can see one of the original shots here where Orion is just that little bit lower down in the sky. But here in the southern hemisphere, Orion rises up into the sky. So maybe 20 or 30 minutes after that shot was taken, it would be back in the position that's represented here. So if you have any questions, talk down in the comments below, but thank you so much for watching this video. And so there you have it, my method of integrating a single image of Orion with a foreground subject. And I hope you like the results. So I'll be really keen to read your comments down below this video. And I really want to wish you all a fantastic Christmas season. And I'll look forward to seeing you in future videos. But for now, I'll see you later.